You ever notice how quiet everything gets when you finally stop chasing something that never gave you peace to begin with? It's not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful at first. It's the kind that stings, like you've been yelling into a storm for years and only now realized no one was ever going to yell back. For a long time, that silence feels like loss. It feels like you're giving something up. The hope, the rush, the dream of being understood. The illusion that someone out there could fill in your missing pieces. That if you found the right woman, she'd unlock your worth, validate your struggle, make the noise in your head finally stop. That belief runs deep. Most men are raised with it, conditioned to think that strength means being chosen. That wholeness is something granted to you the moment someone says, "I love you," and actually means it. We don't talk about it, but it's there, buried under ambition, under performance, under every text message you didn't really want to send, but sent anyway, just to feel connected. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that being alone is a punishment, that not having a girlfriend means something's missing, that if no one wants to be with you, you must be broken, incomplete, behind. But here's the truth. Nobody tells you until you've had to learn it the hard way. The moment you stop needing a girlfriend to feel like a man, that's the moment you become one. Because it's in that letting go, in that terrifying moment of full emotional detachment, that something deeper takes root. A new kind of strength. Not the kind that postures or flexes or performs. Not the kind that needs validation or gets fueled by likes or attention. I'm talking about the kind of strength that's quiet, internal. The kind that can sit in silence without shrinking. The kind that doesn't just survive solitude, but grows stronger inside it. At first, it doesn't feel like strength. It feels like loss, like boredom, like waking up on a Sunday morning and having no one to text and realizing it's just you. No plans, no drama, no emotional spikes to chase, no relationship dynamic to fix or decode or obsess over. Just you, the man you are when no one's watching. And in that stillness, in that raw moment of aloneness, most men panic. Because if you haven't built anything real inside yourself, solitude feels like suffocation. But that's exactly why it's necessary. That's why the Stoics, men like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they didn't chase distractions. They didn't cling to relationships out of fear. They practiced solitude like it was training. Because it was a test, a preparation for something greater, a ritual of detachment that allowed them to discover a truth that most people never touch, that peace is never handed to you by another person. It's built from within, forged, earned, and no one can do it for you. There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes no one is coming to save him. No partner, no friend, no perfect romance is going to heal the ache inside, and when that moment hits, it breaks you. At first, because you've spent so long trying to get someone else to carry the weight you never wanted to face. But when you stop resisting that moment, when you stop running from the silence, when you stop looking for someone to hold your hand through every storm, that's when the shift begins. You start noticing things you missed before. The way your mind calms down when you're not constantly scanning for attention. The way your body feels when you move it because you want to, not because you're trying to impress someone. The way food tastes when you cook it for yourself. The way mornings feel when you wake up without checking if she texted you back. You realize how much of your life has been hijacked by the hunger to be needed, how much energy you've spent trying to be chosen. And it makes you wonder, who would I be if I stopped trying to prove I'm enough? That question, if you let it live inside you, it'll change your life. Because a man who no longer needs to be chosen is a man who has already chosen himself. And when you do that, you become dangerous. Not reckless, not cruel, but unshakable. Because nothing owns you anymore. Not her attention, not her affection, not the hope of a relationship that might finally make you feel like you matter. You start walking differently, talking differently. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop over-explaining your value. You stop begging the world to see you and start seeing yourself. That's when people start to notice. That's when everything changes. When you no longer speak to be heard. When you no longer chase to be seen. When you no longer need to be needed. You don't become emotionless. You become emotionally sovereign. And in that sovereignty, there's a fire that begins to rise. A purpose, a discipline, a structure to your days that isn't built around someone else's validation, but around your own evolution. You wake up earlier. You read more. You write. You lift. You build. Not because anyone's watching, but because you are. Because you've stopped outsourcing your sense of worth. Because you finally understood that the only thing standing between you and your higher self was the belief that someone else could deliver you there. But that's the great lie, isn't it? That the right relationship will save you. That when you find her, you'll finally become him. That when you're loved, you'll finally be lovable. The Stoics would have laughed at that idea because they knew the truth. You don't become whole by being loved. You become whole by becoming. By refining your character. By mastering your impulses. By facing yourself when the room is silent and no one is there to distract you from your own emptiness. That's the storm most men never walk through. They'll trade solitude for comfort, purpose for validation. They'll stay in relationships that dull their edge just to avoid confronting the quiet that's calling them to evolve. But the man who stops needing a girlfriend, he walks through the fire. He lets go of the performance. He accepts the loneliness. He leans into the discomfort. And on the other side of that pain, he doesn't find someone waiting to complete him. He finds himself. And that version of him, he doesn't settle. He doesn't chase. He doesn't need. He chooses. There's something that happens the first time you sit alone, not just physically, but emotionally. You're not texting anyone. You're not refreshing apps. You're not hoping someone notices you disappeared for a few hours. You're just there, with yourself. And at first, it feels hollow, like you've wandered too far from the noise, like maybe you took the wrong exit and now you're lost in your own company. But then something deeper starts to surface, a kind of rawness, a kind of honesty that only emerges when there's no one left to perform for. Because that's what most people don't understand about the man who stops needing a girlfriend. It's not that he's cold. It's that he's finally warm enough inside himself to not seek fire from someone else. He's not numb, he's clear. He doesn't run from intimacy. He runs from dependence. And that's a very different thing. You see, most men don't realize how much of their identity is built around being wanted. They call it love, but it's not. It's a craving. A need to be affirmed, to be seen through someone else's eyes, because they're terrified of what they might see in their own. They chase relationships like bandages, like maybe the right woman will cover the wound they never healed. But the man who walks away from that cycle, he starts asking better questions. Not, who will love me, but, do I love who I am becoming? That question becomes the compass. And everything changes when a man starts moving by internal compass instead of external reward. He stops playing the game. He stops molding himself to be what someone else wants. He stops performing. Because once you've found peace within your own skin, anything that threatens it starts to feel like a betrayal. And you stop betraying yourself just to be liked. That's when discipline becomes desire. You don't hit the gym because you're hoping someone compliments your body. You go because it reminds you of your own power. You don't chase money so you can flash it around to attract someone. You build wealth because it gives you options. You don't read or study or write so you can sound impressive at a dinner party. You do it because feeding your mind becomes more satisfying than feeding your ego. And somewhere in that quiet pursuit, something extraordinary happens. You stop seeking meaning in moments with someone else, and you start building a life that means something, even when no one's watching. That's when solitude stops feeling like exile. It starts feeling like freedom. You eat when you want. You sleep how you like. You move through the world unshackled, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You care enough about your peace to not sell it cheap. It's funny how the world reacts when you get to that place. When you stop chasing, people start wondering what you're chasing instead. When you stop needing, people feel drawn to your detachment. And when you stop begging to be chosen, people start wondering what makes you so whole without them. And that's the paradox of the Stoic path. The more you pull away from needing love, the more love finds you. Not the desperate kind, not the performative kind, but real connection, rooted in freedom, in truth, in sovereignty. Because when you stop needing a girlfriend, relationships stop being prisons. They become choices, conscious ones. And that's when you start attracting something different. Not the kind of partner who completes your script, but the kind who writes their own and invites you to walk alongside them. No enmeshment, no dependency, no saving each other, just walking. Side by side, two whole people who have already done the hard work of facing their shadows. But here's the hard truth. Most won't wait for that. Most will fill the void before they face it. They'll jump into the next almost relationship. They'll chase the next hit of attention. They'll stay busy enough not to feel the ache, and they'll wonder why the cycle repeats. But you're doing something different. You're choosing the path of stillness, of silence, of inner alchemy. And in doing that, you're building something no one can give you, and no one can take away. You're building presence. You're building self-respect. You're building the kind of masculinity that isn't afraid of emotion, but also isn't ruled by it. You're building clarity, not about who they are, but about who you are when no one's looking. And that man is unstoppable, not because he's perfect, but because he's no longer performing. There's this subtle shift that happens when a man truly lets go of the need to be chosen. It doesn't happen in some grand moment of realization. It happens in the quiet, invisible decisions. It happens when you stop checking your phone every few minutes, hoping someone reached out. It happens when you walk past couples in the street and don't feel a pang of comparison. It happens when you spend an entire day with your own thoughts, your own goals, your own standards, and you don't feel empty. That's when you realize solitude isn't a gap to fill, it's a space to grow. And it's in that space that you begin to meet the version of yourself no one ever introduced you to. Not the one you became for others, not the one you polished for approval, but the one who exists beneath all that. The man who has opinions that aren't borrowed, desires that aren't filtered through attraction, habits that aren't built to impress. That's the man who starts emerging when you're no longer orbiting around the need to be with someone. And the deeper you go into that place, the more alien the old world feels. The world where your worth was tethered to someone else's gaze, where silence was something to escape, where being alone was proof that you were losing. But now, silence becomes a friend, stillness becomes sacred, aloneness becomes a forge, and every hour you spend in that space sharpens you. It sharpens your focus. You stop wasting energy on wondering how someone feels about you and start asking how you feel about your own path. You stop rearranging your schedule for someone else's convenience and start building structure that reflects your own ambition. You no longer crave plans just to feel wanted. You crave progress. You crave peace. And peace, once you taste it, ruins you for anything less. That's the irony. Once you truly experience what it means to be at home within yourself, the idea of compromising that to soothe someone else's chaos becomes unthinkable. You stop rescuing. You stop fixing. You stop confusing codependency with love. And that's when you become dangerous. Not in a destructive way, but in a way that says, I will not bend for your comfort. I will not abandon myself to be held. You become untouchable not because you build walls, but because you know what's sacred, and you won't sell it to feel momentarily wanted. You've done that before. You know the price. You've given pieces of yourself to people who weren't even equipped to hold them. You've made yourself smaller, quieter, easier to love, and each time you disappeared a little more. But now you've stopped disappearing. Now you've chosen presence over performance, truth over approval, depth over convenience, and it shows. It shows in the way you speak, in the way you walk, in the way you move through the world, like a man who knows he's not waiting to be completed. He's already whole. And that wholeness, it repels the shallow. It intimidates the dependent. It confuses the ones still chasing distraction. But it attracts the rare, the aligned, the kind of people who meet you where you are, not to fix you, not to use you, but to walk beside you with mutual strength and clarity. But that can't happen until you stop needing. Because as long as you need, you filter everything through desperation. You tolerate too much. You speak too little. You stay too long. You compromise too deeply. And eventually, you forget who you are. You build relationships on the fear of being alone instead of the joy of being real. And those always break. Maybe slowly, maybe violently, but they break. So you learn. Through the silence, through the ache, through the long nights when the world tries to convince you that you're missing out, but you're not. You're stepping in, into your power, into your rhythm, into your own story, the one that doesn't require another person to be meaningful. And once you start living from that place, everything changes. You no longer seek someone to carry you. You look for someone who can walk beside you without slowing your pace. You no longer ask, will they choose me? You ask, are they aligned with what I've built? You no longer fear being alone. You fear abandoning yourself. And that, right there, that's the shift that separates the man who's still chasing from the man who's already arrived. Something happens when a man stops needing a girlfriend, and it's not loud. It's not some dramatic, rebellious moment of cutting ties or walking out of a relationship. It's quiet. It's calm. It's a decision made in the core of his being, a decision to return to himself. And when he does, the world looks different. You start seeing through things, the noise, the flattery, the social games. The need to impress fades because there's no one left to impress but yourself. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. You start looking at your life less like a performance and more like a project, something to build, not to decorate for others, but to fortify for yourself. Your mornings change. You wake up not to check your messages, not to scan for attention, but to move, to build, to sharpen. There's a focus now, a kind of fire that doesn't need to be seen to burn. You don't ask for someone else's energy to get going, you bring your own. You don't need motivation from love songs or heartbreak playlists. You've outgrown those cycles. You're not driven by fantasy anymore. You're driven by purpose. And with purpose comes precision. You become more selective with your time. You stop entertaining people who bring confusion. You stop giving space to people who take more than they give, and not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Because when a man stops needing to be loved by others, he finally learns how to love his own peace. That peace, it becomes your standard. It's the baseline you compare everything to. If someone brings chaos, you feel it instantly. If they try to manipulate, guilt, or play games, you don't argue. You just distance yourself. Not because you're cold, but because you know what it costs to build this inner silence, and you won't trade it for noise again. And let's be honest, it's not that you don't feel attraction anymore. You do. You notice beauty. You still feel desire. But now, desire doesn't control you. It doesn't hijack your focus. It doesn't trick you into giving your power away. You don't mistake chemistry for compatibility. You don't let loneliness make your decisions. You feel the pull, and you pause. You evaluate. You ask yourself, does this align with the life I'm building? Does this strengthen me or distract me? And if the answer is no, you let it go, quickly, cleanly. That's what makes this transformation so rare. Most people don't let go of needing a partner because they're afraid of who they are without one. But you faced that fear. You sat in that silence. You walked through those nights, and you realized something most men never do. You're not empty without a woman. You're just free. And that freedom, it's sacred. Because it lets you rediscover the things that make you come alive, not for someone else's approval, but for your own soul. You pick up the guitar again. You get back in the gym. You revisit the goals you shelved when your time belonged to someone else. You don't have to ask permission to grow anymore. You just grow. You build a life where every hour feels like it belongs to you. And the more you build it, the more you realize this is what it means to be whole. And from that wholeness comes a new kind of connection. Not one based on need, but on choice. You don't chase. You don't cling. You don't beg to be seen. You simply stand in your truth. And those who resonate will come. Not because you're seeking them, but because they see what you've become. And what have you become? A man who doesn't need to be completed. A man who is no longer driven by the absence of a partner, but by the presence of purpose. A man who chooses who he lets into his life based on alignment, not desperation. A man who has made peace with being alone, and in doing so, has become the rarest thing in the modern world. A man who is free. And maybe the most profound shift doesn't happen in your calendar or your habits, but in the way you see yourself. Because when a man no longer needs a girlfriend to feel whole, he finally remembers who he was before the world told him he wasn't enough alone. You start walking differently, not arrogantly, just without hesitation. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight. You move through rooms not looking for validation, but offering presence. People feel it. Some are drawn to it. Others are intimidated. That's not your concern. You stopped living for their reactions a long time ago. Because here's the truth most men never learn. When you stop needing love to prove your worth, you start attracting a different kind of love. One that doesn't come from lack. One that doesn't rise from fear. One that isn't desperate to be filled, but inspired to be shared. And that's the paradox. The moment you stop needing someone, you become someone worth being with. But you're not doing this for a future partner. You're doing this for you. Because you got tired of the emotional roller coaster. You got tired of outsourcing your peace. You got tired of wondering why you were never enough. And finally, you realized you were always enough. You just never gave yourself the chance to find out. So now, you build. Brick by brick, not just a career, not just a body, but a code, a philosophy, a foundation of values you no longer compromise for anyone. You say no when it's uncomfortable. You walk away even when your heart wants to stay. You protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. You've learned that not everyone deserves access to the man you're becoming. And the beauty of it? You don't resent the journey. You don't hate love. You don't carry bitterness like a shield. No, you carry discernment. You carry patience. You carry a deeper kind of love, one that starts with how you treat yourself. You eat better, not to impress, but to feel good in your own skin. You read more, not to sound smart, but to sharpen your mind. You work out, not to show off, but to show up for yourself every day, regardless of who's watching. And it becomes your standard, your rhythm, your way of life. something unshakable. You realized that solitude wasn't a sentence, it was an invitation to reintroduce yourself to your strength, to your resilience, to your purpose. And now that you've met him, the man who walks alone but stands tall, you're not willing to let him go, because he's grounded, he's clear, he's dangerous in the best way. And when the world tries to pull you back, through flattery, temptation, comfort, you smile. Not with arrogance, but with knowing. You've tasted something better than approval. You've touched something stronger than romance. You've built a peace that no one can steal. And from that place, anything is possible. A relationship? Maybe, but not out of need. Only if it adds value. Only if it respects your standards. Only if it aligns with your mission. Because this time, you're not afraid to walk away. You know that solitude isn't your enemy. It's your ally, your forge, your filter. And in the silence of that freedom, something echoes. Not loneliness, not longing. Just this. I'm not waiting to be loved. I'm choosing to become someone love can't shake. That's what happens when a man stops needing a girlfriend. He becomes a man the world can't manipulate. A man no storm can move. A man finally, unapologetically, himself.